Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today, we're taking a look at Forsaken Realms Vahrin's Call, a new action RPG from indie studio Titan Rock. Vahrin's Call, which is a lot less of a mouthful than its full title, and how I'll refer to it for the rest of this review, has been on my Steam wishlist for quite some time, and has also been in development for quite some time as well, with the game's concept dating all the way back to 2014. It hasn't been on my radar quite that long, but still caught my attention thanks to a style and personality very reminiscent of Fable and some of my other favorite fantasy RPGs, along with intriguing gameplay ideas like its classless character progression system. Titan Rock provided a review key for access prior to the game's launch, and has also released several patches incorporating fixes and feedback, so any issues I encountered that have since been addressed or that remain unresolved at the time of writing will be noted as such. Like all of my reviews, this one is based on the state of the product at the time I played it, and will include my honest feedback, both good and bad. But in this case, there is a lot more of the former to discuss than the latter. After spending just over 30 hours with Vahrin's Call, I'm pleased to report that while this certainly is an indie title, with all the requisite baggage one might expect, like lower production value, performance considerations, and a lack of features and systems present in higher budget games, it ultimately left me incredibly impressed as an initial offering from a self-funded and published studio, with its world building, level design, and most importantly, that free-flowing progression gameplay all leaving their mark in quite a memorable way. Vahrin's Call is a self-described, narrative-driven fantasy ARPG, and draws inspiration from several contemporaries, most notably Fable, but others like The Elder Scrolls, and even Lord of the Rings and Warhammer too. Fable is the clearest comparison, and is immediately apparent simply from a quick glance at the game's art style, combat mechanics, and humorous writing. Those other influences are also felt in different ways, like a leveling and skill system reminiscent of Skyrim, and story elements drawn from franchises like the aforementioned Warhammer. There are even more subtle hints of DNA drawn from genres like Souls games in relation to things like combat. Not in the sense of punishing difficulty, but in enemy mannerisms and attack patterns, and the way you master them to overcome their challenge. Vahrin's Call clearly has a lot going on, but one of the things that impressed me the most was how well almost all of these concepts combine to create a unified gameplay loop. And while some of its secondary systems could use a little more fleshing out to feel truly impactful, none of its elements felt tacked on or included solely for the sake of fan service or padding out its content. Ultimately, that fantasy ARPG label is absolutely accurate, although the narrative-driven descriptor is a little more shaky, which we'll dissect in more detail shortly. If you enjoy games like Fable and The Elder Scrolls, particularly while playing in third person for the latter, you'll feel right at home, and Vahrin's Call has threaded the needle quite well between borrowing concepts and taking inspiration from its forebears, while adding its own mechanics and takes on gameplay to help set it apart. Along with discussing indie games and RPGs here on the channel, I cover all kinds of reviews, retrospectives, and industry discussions too. So if you enjoy this video or just love talking about video games like I do, consider subscribing. Vahrin's Call takes place in the world of Leda, and more specifically, the game's namesake city of Vahrin, which has been well and truly fucked by brutal wars with invading monsters and demons. Vahrin's own forces and the Peacekeepers of the Combined Order, an army assembled by other free cities to provide aid, both failed to repulse the invaders, and as a last desperate measure, Vahrin's queen Eleru issued a call for aid to any mercenaries willing to brave these dangers, which is where you come in. Your journey begins with a custom character creator that is extremely robust, featuring tons of choices and flexibility in crafting your merc. In true homage to its inspirations, Elder Scrolls in particular, you can craft both entirely normal and entirely abnormal looking characters, although limited to the human variety, but I was still very impressed with the depth and extent of options available. Once satisfied with their looks, your merc sets off into Vahrin to find their place in its story. This writing style is very reminiscent of Fable, and I loved its wry humor, crude jokes, and lighthearted moments that were tempered with the occasional serious scene to help convey the gravity of Vahrin's precarious predicament. During this journey, you'll interact with fully voiced NPCs, including vendors and quest givers, that converse via brief conversations. The protagonist is barely voiced or written at all, however, which is fine, as the game leans into the silent protagonist, hero of few words trope. Despite other characters talking to you, there are next to no dialogue selections, and none that offer different choices or outcomes in relation to quests. So those searching for an interactive world with complex characters and branching quest decisions, this definitely does not scratch that itch. Its world isn't populated by many NPCs either, but this makes sense from a lore perspective, as most of Vahrin's population either died or fled the city when things went to shit. So this density of characters matches the scale and setting. The writing for most NPCs was also fine, and aside from a few minor spelling errors that stuck out to a stickler like me, conversing with them felt thematic, if a little bare bones at times. When it comes to quests, the main story is focused around the fate of Vahrin, paired with side missions, bounties, monster hunts, and dungeons to tackle too. These can be discovered by speaking to NPCs or even finding items in the environment, which is a nice touch. Quest design was mostly fine, with more basic options like the RPG classic debt collector mission, along with a few standouts sprinkled in. Their corresponding stories, conveyed through dialogue and written collectibles, were also fairly solid, even breaking into great in a few of the best cases. If getting blackout drunk, landing yourself in an underground fight club run by a talking critter, and getting a super cool thematic weapon as your reward sounds good, you'll feel right at home. And it was great quests like this that made me want to find and finish every single one. These were often spread out across multiple zones too, which was another aspect I thoroughly appreciated. There are short cutscenes with dialogue and exposition to keep these tales moving forward, with some pretty chunky ones later on that nearly overstayed their welcome at times, but never felt entirely overbearing. There's plenty of freedom with quest markers and guidance too, which can be enabled or disabled, tailoring the experience to your level of comfort. But some objectives are largely unguided regardless, forcing you to figure out little riddles or solve small puzzles entirely on your own. As someone who typically prefers more hand-holding over less, these were awesome, providing some of my favorite content and were extremely well done, striking the perfect balance between challenge and payoff. There were a couple stumbles along the way, like one quest where I deduced the answer to a riddle quite early on, but couldn't actually deliver my answer to the NPC in question, until I found the specific collectible needed to progress, which was understandable from a design standpoint, but still kind of lame. There was another that upon starting, felt like I had either missed a crucial part of its progression or it had bugged out, as I seemingly stumbled right into the middle of its events, or at least what felt that way, but maybe it was a writing issue instead. A single city serving as the game's main setting isn't new, and titles like Bloodborne, Dragon Age 2, and Dishonored have all done this previously with varying degrees of success. But the concept works out perfectly here, and Vahrin, plus its outlying areas, is an engaging backdrop for these events and feels perfectly paced, combined with environmental storytelling that really sells the city in ruins vibe. My impression going in was that as a mercenary, there would be flexibility in how you approached this call to Vahrin. It's stated pretty explicitly that the potential for riches is a big motivator. And while I always play RPGs as a goody two-shoes, bleeding heart hero, I figured the story could also be approached from the perspective of a cold-hearted sellsword just in it for the money, or a mix of both. But this protagonist is pretty set in stone, which some might find disappointing. Likewise, Titan Rock's environmental and written storytelling are very well done, and really help immerse you in the setting of Vahrin and the trials and tribulations of those who persevered and perished during its downfall. But while these elements are interesting and engaging, the implementation of its overarching lore left a lot to be desired. A ton of concepts, places, and aspects of the world of Leda are mentioned or even seen in some capacity, like the other free cities, the Combined Order's army of peacekeepers, the worship and banning of different gods, and the Gron, turtle-like beings that are the sole sentient departure from humans in the setting. But none of these are really fleshed out or expanded upon beyond the occasional note, line of dialogue, or small bit of flavor text on an item. The vision for a larger, cohesive world is clearly present, which I'd fully expect to be expanded on in any sequels or follow-ups. But the overall narrative implementation feels like a missed opportunity, especially when introducing a brand new setting for the very first time. This team has undeniably crafted an engaging setting with excellent secondary writing, even if the overall narrative execution wasn't perfect, and I'd love to see this potential expanded on further. Without getting into spoilers, the main quest is serviceable, nothing particularly memorable, shocking, or that differentiates it from the RPG crowd. But its world building, writing, and side content, combined with excellent gameplay mechanics, do more than enough to elevate this experience to a level worthy of praise. So, if I'm feeling mixed on those narrative and RPG systems, what makes me think so highly of Vahrin's Call at the end of the day? It ultimately comes down to the game's exploration, but most importantly of all, its free-flowing, classless progression system, the core pillar of Titan Rock's design philosophy. Leveling in Vahrin's Call works like most other RPGs, acquiring XP by performing actions, defeating enemies, and completing quests, with a skill point granted each time a new level is obtained. There is a level cap, so you can unlock everything and become an untouchable god, but this doesn't come into play until quite late. These skill points can be allocated within each specialty, which cover areas like weapon styles, types of magic, and alchemy, to activate specific abilities associated with each, like enabling weapon combos, providing passive stat buffs, or unlocking additional ingredients for potion crafting. However, each new skill can only be activated after increasing its specialty through your actions, like fighting in combat, casting spells, and consuming potions, similar to the skill system from something like Skyrim. Beyond that, each specific skill can only be learned by finding a skill book to unlock the requisite upgrade, which are scattered throughout the world, providing another spin on this system to set it apart. The icing on this classless cake is that both entire specialties and individual skills can be respecced at any time with no cost incurred, which provides a huge level of flexibility and build diversity from the game's opening minutes all the way through its very last encounter, which is, quite frankly, awesome. Build respecking, even for free, is nothing new, but the secret sauce of Vahrin's Call is the ease with which this can be done, coupled with the fact that anything can be viable at any point, whether it's a new weapon, spell, or entirely different playstyle based around a new item you find. Even if a particular specialty isn't fully leveled up to reap all the benefits of that newly acquired gear, almost anything can still be viable from the moment it's found thanks to scaling loot, which further incentivizes trying out different builds. Even if you have one or two favorites, which I certainly did, each and every time I found a new ability or item, I immediately tried it out and was constantly amazed by just how well my power level kept pace with the game's later levels. This classless system is an ingenious twist on something that's been done countless times before, and it worked very well overall, providing the incentive not only to try new builds, but to thoroughly explore this world, as you can beeline through without searching for skill books, but you might miss out on a cool new spell or ability that perfectly complements your playstyle. Despite my affinity for the system, it's admittedly imperfect. For starters, maxed out specialties with most skills unlocked are super powerful, but beyond that, there's really no point in using them once that level of mastery is achieved, as it provides no benefit to increasing your power further. And if you miss out on any of those individual skill books, particularly for a specialty you're deeply invested in, well, you're shit out of luck. I tried to be as thorough as possible, combing through every single nook and cranny in each area, but still missed several of these tomes, and it was a real bummer seeing grayed out undiscovered skills in some of my favorite trees. I'd love an alternate way to unlock skills without obtaining every single book, like permanently spending skill points to discover any missing entries, but only after maxing out the specialty itself, which takes a significant time investment, as my first max specialty came roughly 2/3 of the way through my playthrough. I'm not a game designer, shocker I know, and have no clue on how viable a solution like this might be, but I'd really love to see some kind of endgame option added in the future. There's also the capability to deactivate all skills in a specialty at once, which is a great quality of life feature for quickly swapping between different builds, but I'd love to see a corresponding option for reactivating them all at once too, instead of having to go through and select them one by one. Leveling and general progression always felt good, with a constant stream of new skill points flowing to help beef up your mercenary and empower all of the new things you'll discover along the way. Your character has 3 core stats: health, stamina, and focus, or magic, which all function exactly as you'd expect. One nice touch is stamina only being consumed by special attacks, blocking, and dodging, not basic attacks or sprinting, which allows you to play aggressively and zoom around the world. There are 2 weapon loadout slots, each with a main and offhand option, which can be swapped between quickly during combat, plus 5 armor pieces for your head, chest, arms, legs, and feet. Armor is divided into 2 classes, standard and heavy, with too much heavy gear reducing your ability to dodge, going from a roll that can cover a decent distance to a quick sidestep that covers much less. Although, your general dodging effectiveness can be enhanced regardless by leveling up the armor skill. There's also an armor weight limit, which if exceeded results in over-encumbrance, restricting your ability to sprint, jump, and perform other movement actions. Thankfully, there is no general weight limit or carrying capacity, so you can pick up as much gear and junk as you please, which is perfect for a hoarder like me, and almost necessary based on the volume of items you'll collect during this adventure. I didn't spot any armor set bonuses, but there are unique weapons with special effects that synergize with different magic and combat styles, or are just really cool. Who doesn't love smashing heads in with a giant frying pan? Up to 3 talismans can also be equipped, providing bonuses that range from flat stat buffs to more exotic abilities like saving you from death or randomly increasing or decreasing damage. Weapons and armor can be upgraded with resources acquired from flora and fauna, along with dismantling other gear and junk. There was a noticeable difference between a level 1 and a level 10 item, but you consistently find new options that outperform older gear, even if upgraded. And fully maxing out a loadout requires a significant investment of coin, the game's only currency, and resources. In fact, I bankrupt myself trying to fully upgrade a whole set of weapons and armor before the game's final stretch. And I wasn't spending my coin all willy-nilly before that either. I would prioritize armor upgrades over weapons, as your outfit can remain viable longer depending on playstyle, while better weapons come fast and frequently, which in this case is a double-edged sword. Impressively, every piece of gear I found was not only powerful, but looked awesome too, with some very cool options for your fashion game. This included some nice homages, like a shout out to Titan Rock themselves, but also Warcraft 3 Frozen Throne, Skooma, and Batman references that all made me chuckle. The one downside to all that gear is that it can be a bit hard to parse through. You can favorite individual pieces to keep them at the top of your inventory, but quality of life features like loadouts, sorting, and other filters aren't present. Although you can compare your currently equipped items against others in your inventory, at least. Along with weapons, there are 4 types of magic available: fire, ice, earth, and alteration, all of which feel viable and powerful, with their own spread of cool and unique abilities. Alteration was my favorite, with a healing spell that surpassed any other sources of health quite early on, plus fun options like Transmogrify and Petrify to use against your enemies. Using ice magic to slow down opponents was my second go-to, and was also extremely powerful. But certain foes have resistances to different types of spells, so you do need to pick the right approach based on each encounter. Regardless of their specific school of magic, all of these abilities look and feel great to use. Whether it's a spinning shield of rocks pulled from the earth, or a blaze of fire spreading out around you, each spell is simply awesome. Magic is powerful, and really shouldn't be neglected as part of your repertoire, but it takes time to cast and can even leave you stationary, so balancing its strength against these vulnerabilities is an important trade-off. Similar to skill books, new spells are discovered out in the world, and can be upgraded like your other gear using magical essences and coin, so long as the requisite level in that magic specialty has also been obtained. Beyond magic, there are tons of status effects that can be inflicted on enemies but also back onto you, like burning, bleeding, and poison, providing tons of options that help deal with specific foes, but also dangers to be acutely aware of, especially during later levels. An alchemy system is also present, where you craft potions by combining different ingredients. This starts out fairly basic, but increasing your alchemy skill allows for a scaling number of effects in each brew, and crafting of potions that cure or inflict all manner of those status effects. The menu for crafting and equipping potions is a little unintuitive at first, but I figured it out pretty quick, and you can even name, color code, and choose different icons for each unique creation. Another cool gameplay twist is a shared pool of potion charges that refills over time, instead of a set number of each, or the need to craft and carry around dozens of the same type, and their capacity and recharge rate can also be increased with skills. Finally, there's an entire specialty and upgrade station dedicated to building, upgrading, and using traps. This is admittedly the one gameplay element I engage with the least, but even my short time with them showed they are very effective, especially when combined with stealth. And this system is an awesome inclusion that offers something almost entirely unique from your typical range of RPG skills. In order to manage all of these spells, potions, and abilities in combat, 8 different options can be equipped to a quick action wheel, plus special bow-specific abilities with effects like bleed and poison if a weapon of that type is equipped. Speaking of weapons, there are a ton of options to choose from, ranging from that classic sword and shield combo to dual weapons, greatswords, hammers, and more. I'm usually a stealth archer kind of guy, but two-handed options were my bread and butter here, as they hit multiple enemies easily, had cool animations, and felt better than a plain sword and shield. Each weapon class has unique abilities and combos like a ground stomp and spin attack with great axes and hammers, throwing dirt at your enemies to stun them with greatswords, and a cool jump back attack with dual melee weapons. Using a shield is fine, and timing a perfect parry opens enemies up to a strong counterattack. But dodging felt much better and was my method of avoidance for most of my playthrough. This is definitely more of a dodge through than dodge away kind of game, another aspect that feels a little soulsy, and throwing myself around while taking out enemies with my greatsword felt great. Plus, running with it on your shoulder looks cool as fuck. I wasn't sold on bows either, but they grew on me over time. You can hit enemy weak points for extra damage, but perfectly timing the release of your arrows grants the same effect. Hitting those perfect timings isn't too difficult, but feels even better after unlocking some skills to increase the window. With all those weapons to find and equip, there are plenty of enemies to test them out against too, although this is another area where the scale of Vahrin's Call is felt more acutely than others. There are human factions with the spread of archers, melee combatants, and spellcasters, which were some of my favorite foes to fight, along with wild beasts like giant bugs, vicious rodents, and yeti-like abominations. The stars of this show were the 8th spawn, however, magical zombie demon-type things that come in several distinct varieties, all of which feature creepy visuals, and these were the most fun to fight by far. Each enemy has a few attack patterns and moves to memorize, which could be a little hard to read sometimes, but were never too bad. This was another aspect that felt Soulsy, as they would hang in the air or hold their weapon back just long enough to make the timing feel unnatural, adding to the challenge of combat. Enemy AI was pretty simple, and definitely not perfect. Sometimes foes would turn and attack immediately when a nearby ally was struck, and others they would ignore you until it was time for their own demise. Speaking of enemy detection, stealth attacks are possible by creeping up behind enemies with certain weapons, and different armor can affect their awareness of your movements too. There are no dedicated stealth skills, however, and while it can be a viable secondary method for approaching combat, making things easier by taking out isolated enemies or thinning a group before engaging, it is very simple and mostly feels like an afterthought, especially for a sneak archer like me. There were a couple times I was swarmed by large groups and became stuck, unable to escape before dying, which was a little annoying, especially when large groups of enemies can dumpster you quickly if you aren't careful. Hostile Gron could also be frustrating to fight, as they peppered you with spells from afar and hid behind large shields that stopped your attacks at seemingly impossible angles. But again, this was far from constant and nothing egregious. There is a target lock-on system, and combat flowed well both with and without it. There were a couple instances where the lock-on would switch to another enemy during combat, even ones completely hidden, which was slightly disorienting and threw off your rhythm, but didn't happen often either. Vahrin's Call also features a decent roster of boss battles, some of which took a handful of tries to overcome, but most were conquerable on my first attempt, even at a higher difficulty. A quick note on difficulty while we're here. I started my playthrough on the normal setting, which was a bit challenging early on, but got quite easy about halfway through. I then switched to the second hardest, which felt much better, with enemies hitting harder but still feeling ultimately fair. I actually prefer playing games on normal, not too difficult difficulty, especially RPGs and story-driven experiences, where I'm much more interested in the world and, well, story than overcoming souped-up enemies. That being said, while the normal difficulty here is fine, if you like any sort of challenge while playing your RPGs, I'd recommend bumping it up at least one level to see how it feels. There are nice in-game explanations of the different options, along with detailed overviews of pretty much any gameplay system present, which can help you decide. While the higher challenge did feel better and resulted in more deaths than I probably would have had otherwise, respawn points, called Shrines of Soul, were always generously placed, and nothing is permanently lost upon death, so have no fear of that increased challenge, even if it's out of the ordinary for you, like it was for me. Okay, back to boss fights now. The visual presentation of these enemies is great, with a wide variety to face off against. More giant bugs, lava worms, human duelists of many varieties, along with more fantastical encounters I won't spoil. Many of these fights reinforce that Souls-like attack timing and help you acclimate to this style of combat. There are several entirely optional bosses to seek out too, some of which were my favorite fights, and you can always come back later if they give you too much trouble to start. These encounters often reward unique weapons, some of which were the coolest visually and most powerful gameplay-wise, and I'd highly recommend taking the time to find and overcome these opponents, both for the rewards and enjoyable experience of actually fighting them. One optional encounter in particular, hidden behind an awesome puzzle, featured a remixed enemy design with its own unique visual and gameplay twists, and combined with the effort required to reach its hidden location, a cool backstory, and powerful reward, this was one of the best bosses in the game. The penultimate boss took the cake as my favorite, offering the most challenging fight with one of the coolest movesets and visual designs, along with heavy narrative impact, which all came together perfectly. Unfortunately, the same can't be said for the final boss, and without getting into spoilers, it was a pretty weak way to end this solid gauntlet of encounters, and dampened my enjoyment of the game's conclusion. Combat in Vahrin's Call isn't the punchiest, but it does feel smooth, and the loop of swinging your weapons, casting spells, throwing down traps, and using this huge suite of tools and abilities to tackle each challenge never got old, with each encounter serving as another opportunity to engage with the fun. The other standouts of Vahrin's Call are its exploration and level design. I was sold on both before I even finished exploring its very first zone, and they only got better from there. And while classless progression is its true standout feature, these were absolutely my favorite parts of the experience. This isn't a seamless open world, but one divided into separate smaller zones, each with their own enemies, NPCs, quests, puzzles, and loot. These distinct areas are all connected, both by regular traversal and fast travel via signposts, which, like its respawn points, are very generous. Although, they are only listed alphabetically in the map, which can get a little confusing, and a different way to filter them would be nice. Speaking of maps, each area has its own dedicated version, which are all very detailed and beautifully done, and can actually help you find your way around if you pay close attention. But there is plenty to find through unmarked exploration too, even outside the confines of those drawings. These levels are incredibly dense, packed full of secrets to uncover, challenges to overcome, storytelling tidbits to find, and so much more. I was constantly impressed, not only when entering each new zone, but repeatedly throughout, as I realized just how deep their design really went. Whoever is in charge at Titan Rock clearly has a love and respect for Fable-style gameplay spaces, and have carried that torch forward more than admirably, deserving massive credit for pulling off such excellent level design. A lantern can be used when exploring dark areas like caves or strolling about at night, and both a day-night cycle and different weather patterns are present, along with various lantern cosmetics that change their look and glow. Beyond exploring the layout of these levels, there are simple but engaging traversal sections as well, which were never too challenging but always a nice touch, and yet another mechanic that can lead to entirely new areas you weren't expecting to discover. There are plenty of mental puzzles too, ranging from written riddles to environmental cues and interactions, and these were always a joy to engage with and solve, often providing worthwhile rewards for your trouble. This was another callback to that Fable-esque design I hadn't thought about in years, and didn't even realize how much I missed. Make sure you pay very close attention to these environments, prompts, and any hints you can glean from them. Otherwise, you will definitely miss out on some of the game's best stuff. While Vahrin serves as the game's centerpiece, you aren't limited to exploring urban environments, and will need to navigate its outskirts before even stepping foot inside. There are some switch-ups afterward too, like the Eastvale Swamp, and exploring a big open area after being cooped up in the city was another great change of pace. After working through the first couple areas, you'll reach the South Vale Hamlet, which serves as your home base, and is also home to the game's various vendors and crafting stations. I never engaged with the merchant much, except to buy items that were otherwise unobtainable, like new lanterns, but you'll be making frequent stops to visit the alchemy cauldron, spellcrafting table, and blacksmith. Other NPCs can be found both in and outside the hamlet, and despite the small number of characters in most zones, their design still feels perfectly spaced, and you are constantly bumping and bouncing from one activity, discovery, and encounter to the next. Each area features new gear and skill books to collect, along with gnomies, a form of garden gnome, to locate and destroy for one particular quest, or just because you like smashing the pesky little fuckers. There's also a tracker to show what you found, but some of these items and upgrades are really out of the way, and take some serious effort to find and reach. There are tons of resources and items to gather for crafting, along with coin to fund your shopping sprees and bankroll your loadout upgrades. All lootable containers are identified with a sparkling golden glow, the color of which can be fully customized, which is another cool inclusion. However, having to point the cursor directly at objects to pick them up or interact is an odd choice, especially when playing in third person and considering how often you'll be grabbing stuff. Trust me, my mercenaries' hoarding habits could go toe-to-toe with Geralt of Rivia, although proximity looting was added in a pre-launch patch and was a welcome inclusion. Most enemies and resources respawn eventually, so there are plenty of chances to collect supplies and level up through combat, although farming never felt necessary to keep pace with progression overall. There is no New Game Plus at the time of recording, however the game doesn't end after beating the final boss, so you can return and explore, finish other quests, and continue grinding skills afterward, and you're even given a little bit more to do post-battle as well. These levels were truly impressive, dense, multi-layered, packed with collectibles and secrets to find, and a genuinely impressive outing for an indie studio's very first game. As you've seen by now, Vahrin's Call features both striking visuals and a soundtrack that, while not quite as impressive, still hits some high notes at times. Right from the start, this music is beautiful, and paired with an art style that evokes the same whimsical energy as Fable, and I was constantly reminded of my time spent with that franchise during my adventures in Vahrin. While its visual direction is largely bright and lighthearted, this world isn't all sunshine and rainbows, that's for sure. There are several pretty disturbing scenes you come across, which come as even more of a surprise in the context of these visuals. The game's environments feature the strongest direction, complementing the excellent quality of their functional design, and spaces like the Academy, Temple of Narum, and Hidden Grotto were all downright beautiful to look at. This is followed closely by the look of its gear, almost all of which is really damn cool, with some excellently designed weapons and armor sets that you want to acquire for their looks just as much as their function. Similar to environments and weapons, the visual effects of its spells were also excellent, and by far my favorite aspects of the game to look at. I'd often get distracted during combat just from staring at my screen while burning enemies to a crisp or calling down a shower of icy projectiles. And these animations and effects were genuinely good and really well done. Its character models are fine, serviceable but not stand out by any means, although they do fit in with the pretty, bright, and vibrant style, with simple NPC and enemy designs that fit those Fable vibes. While models themselves are decent, their animations can feel a little stiff at times, and actions like raising your shield or lowering your weapon come across as jerky and unnatural. While its visual direction is certainly true to that Fable inspiration, it can be at odds with the narrative and environmental storytelling at times, coming across as an imperfect match for the dark tone they were meant to convey. This seemed like more of an asset limitation than anything else, and while it did cause some dissonance, wasn't a deal breaker by any means. Music is solid in general, but the best tracks were saved for the final few areas, and featured some really good stuff. The soundtracks for the last 2 or 3 locations gave off the same vibes as ambient tracks from Elder Scrolls, which is perfect for me and matched the on-screen visuals perfectly too. Animations during conversation are also fairly mundane, with minimal lip-syncing and some hand-waving and other gestures as you converse. Voice acting performances are decent, but this is another area where the quality bar is evident, with their delivery and recording definitely showcasing the limitations of the smaller team at times. Although, to give credit, the actors themselves seem to give it their all. General audio mixing was also a bit off at times, with voices and sound effects seemingly too quiet, and this was another area Titan Rock is actively working to address before the game's release. Overall, Vahrin's Call clearly leans on its Fable DNA in the visual and audio department, and largely sticks that delivery, despite some inconsistencies with matching its narrative and the quality of its audio. Before wrapping things up, we need to touch on performance. And while Vahrin's Call ran fairly well overall, there are a couple issues to make note of. My entire playthrough was done on controller, my personal preference for third-person titles, but mouse and keyboard are also fully supported. I'd suggest taking a quick look to see if switching any keybinds around might be useful, as the default bindings felt a bit clunky at times, at least on controller. The game offers a decent settings menu with descriptions of each option and the impact they have on performance. I ran into those audio mixing issues pretty early on, and was mostly able to fix them by bumping up the master volume, then tinkering with the others as needed. Something else I had issues with quite early were the default aim assist and sensitivity settings for bows. At first, I thought there was no aim assist at all, and was struggling to land my shots, even on stationary targets. I'm not that bad, so I played around with the settings a bit, and turns out, it just wasn't very strong. After a bit of tinkering, things felt much better, and this is another area I'd check out too. Getting into how the game actually runs. On my main PC with the Ryzen 7 78X3D and NVIDIA 5080, playing at 1440p, all settings maxed and no DLSS, I was hitting about 60 FPS with drops down to the 55 range. On max settings with DLSS set to balance, I was able to reach 170 FPS, but this was also inconsistent, and after capping my frames at 60, performance was nearly flawless for the rest of my playthrough. On my laptop, which sports an i7-13620H, and NVIDIA 4050, I was bouncing between 20 and 30 FPS on medium and high with no DLSS, and a pretty solid locked 60 FPS at the same settings with DLSS enabled. Based on the minimum required hardware, older systems should be able to run the game with some compromises in fidelity, and newer systems should have minimal issues. But as always, your mileage may vary. I also ran into the infamous Unreal Engine shader compilation stuttering issue when entering each area for the first time, but it always went away quickly. The most notable and strangest issue was actually related to CPU utilization on my main PC. When entering the hamlet for the very first time, my CPU usage skyrocketed to above 80%, when it usually sits at 20 to 30% for most games I play. That, coupled with my machine sounding like a fighter jet about to take off, was pretty concerning. Capping my frames at 60 helped, but the issue continued. There was one other area where my CPU spiked to 100%, and after lowering all my settings, capping my frame rate, and anything else I could think of, the only way to alleviate this at all was locking my frames to the bare minimum 30 FPS, which didn't even resolve the issue while also making the game look and run like ass. These spikes came up again in a couple areas later, but never that badly, and Titan Rock did relay they are working on optimization and performance improvements in the lead up to launch, but this is absolutely something to keep a close eye on once the game does release. When it comes to bugs, these were thankfully negligible, with tiny visual glitches like small instances of pop-in, bodies getting stuck on the environment after stealth attacks, and some weird-looking water and lantern light textures, but nothing major by any means. I encountered a single gameplay bug during my playthrough, where a spell became stuck casting on repeat and almost got me killed, but this eventually subsided on its own and was the only such problem I ever saw, with no hard crashes, broken quests, or anything similar, which is always commendable. I was quite excited to finally check out Vahrin's Call. but didn't expect it to sink its claws into me the way it did. I ended up neglecting both my gym and sleep schedules to play more of it, which, while not good for my health, is always a good sign for whatever game is keeping me locked away in my office. I spent just over 30 hours on the title, which Titan Rock expects for a completionist-style playthrough, and knocked out all the side content I could find and finish, with 80 to 90% of gear and skill books collected. If you stick to the main quest, this playtime could easily be cut in half, or more. But like I said before, the game's best content is its exploration and side quests, so you'd be doing yourself a pretty big disservice by doing so. You can absolutely tell this was a game made by a smaller studio, with some funny-looking animations, lack of complex features like transmog and item filters, and the general look, feel, and scope of the overall experience. But, on the other hand, the game's item descriptions, environmental storytelling, level design, and classless progression are all so well done, and clearly made by a passionate team who wants to do everything they can within their limitations. And after spending a good chunk of time with Vahrin's Call, it seems they not only worked within them to deliver a solid product, but in several cases, actually exceeded them too. You'll need to set your expectations before diving in. This doesn't reinvent the genre and isn't the next indie phenomenon like Expedition 33, and it does have issues. But its quality and strongest elements ultimately make this a solid pickup for fans of Fable, Elder Scrolls, and similar RPG experiences. With a $35 price tag at launch, half the average AAA game price these days, the depth of this experience and value it provides, pitfalls aside, make that a solid proposition for the offering you receive. Although, if you're on the fence, I'd consider waiting for even a tiny discount, which would make the value of this package even more appealing. I am truly impressed by Titan Rock's first showing as an indie studio, and would love to see the world of Leda expanded on further, because this team clearly has the passion and dedication to create a deep, engaging, and generally well-polished experience, paired with a keen eye for world building, writing, and storytelling that I hope to see more of in the future. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe for more gaming content, and let me know your thoughts on Forsaken Realms Vahrin's Call in the comments below. Are Titan Rock's classless progression and classic fantasy RPG DNA enough to pique your interest? Or would you rather dedicate your time and money to bigger budget titles instead? Either way, thank you for watching. You're a real one and I appreciate you, and hope to see you in the next one. Catch you later!